Well, hello, Menlo Church. My name is Tim Wong, and I'm here with Richard Lee. And Richard Lee is from International Justice Missions, and we're so great for having him come in and sit down with us and have a conversation about IJM. And Richard, can you share a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, first of all.
Absolutely.
Thank you for all of you who are listening. I am a global officer of public engagement at International Justice Mission. IJM, for short, is a global nonprofit that works on the front lines of ending violence and trafficking around the world. I've been with them for 10 years. I've done some church partnerships and now public engagement. So public engagement for me right now is training and equipping our staff and survivors to be able to talk about the God of justice on the global stage. So as you take our 1,400 employees worldwide in the numerous jurisdictions that we work in, being able to say whether you're talking to a government partner or to a church or to a general audience, that we're able to sort of compellingly talk about the work that we do, but also sort of the charge of justice that God has given us.
That's awesome. Oh, it's so great to have you here, Richard. Maybe could you just walk us down a little bit of what you know about the history that Menlo Church has had with IJM?
Yeah, well, it's a rich history. There has been many, many years of partnership. And as many of you already know about IJM, I'm sure that it's been a partnership that has been a deep and rich history and has been able to really influence so many people. If you think about, church partnerships, if you center it around the financial partnership, but really it goes beyond that, really the community engagement that so many of you have engaged with. But really on the end of that is people in poverty, people in places of poverty whose lives have been substantially changed, whose futures have been changed as a result of what is taking place upstairs in a sanctuary in Menlo Park, California.
Yeah. No, I couldn't help but think about, when people think about human trafficking, I think some people think like, oh, that happens some impoverished portion of our globe, maybe like in Cambodia where we just came back from,
Yeah.
and or other parts of like Africa. What would you say to that?
Well, human trafficking is the picture, I think, of modern day slavery is maybe a little bit different than maybe what people have as a conventional view. The modern day picture of slavery is actually not about bars and chains, people being shackled, although that does happen.
Yeah.
It really is actually about financial obligation. And so a family will have a sick child and won't be able to pay for medicine. And so they'll go to a wealthy person in the community and they'll say, can we borrow money for medication for our sick child, or for clothes for school, or for food for their table? And what ends up happening is that small loan, it could be as little as $20. That small loan creates a sense of obligation, and they say, oh yeah, sure, just come to my factory and work it off, or just send one of your children to me and then work off the loan. But what ends up happening is that this false sense of obligation snowballs through fines and fees and interest that people there's no online account that they're checking.
Right.
So it just balloons into this thing. I mean, we have haunting and chilling videos of slave owners who are laughing to our undercover investigators on camera saying, oh yeah, they'll never pay it off. It's just a trick.
Right.
And so it creates this false sense of obligation so that once you have a debt, then that's actually what enslaves you. So they don't need a bar, they don't need a chain because they have a debt. And that's really the picture of how modern day slavery is actually affecting disproportionately communities of poverty. So when you have people in power and people in poverty, it creates that sort of combination for people to be enslaved.
Yeah, so it really is a power struggle, power play.
Absolutely.
And so I think for our audience out there, I think it's really important for us to have a real clarity around what of human trafficking is, what is slavery, what is exploitation, because it does take a lot of different forms. So maybe this is a great question. Is that possible to even happen here in the Bay Area?
Yeah, I mean, it is happening everywhere. It is very common because you have poverty everywhere and you have imbalances of power everywhere. And even here in California, even here in the United States, it becomes more accentuated the more you get into, deeply impoverished areas where there is a lack of government intervention. And that's really where we focus our work at International Justice Mission, is working with the government to be able to enforce the laws that already exist. So all of these places where we work, the laws are there to prevent this sort of exploitation and enslavement from happening. But what we're doing is we're coming alongside the government for either a lack of resources, a lack of training, a lack of will for them to actually enforce their laws. We're coming alongside of them and saying, actually, there is a pathway for you to be able to enforce the law. And so our investigators partner with police, our aftercare workers partner with social services, our lawyers partner with prosecutors to basically show them the pathway of justice, to help them along until they actually end up doing the work themselves. And we're seeing this time and again, over and over again.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I know that your work has had a huge impact on Menlo Church, which is why human trafficking is one of our 5 strategic priorities, along with poverty, which is kind of like, as you mentioned, is part of the cause of it, as well as youth development, as well as church planting, and as well as mental health. So human trafficking is one of our top 5 priorities. And I do know, to your point, like, yes, we have a number of partners like Freedom Insight and others that focus in on human trafficking taking place right here in California as well. But I'm going to lean in a little bit into what you kind of touch base upon is IJM's unique role of collaborating with city workers, government, nonprofits. Do you have a story about like how IJM really played that pivotal role in bringing change to a community?
Yeah, well, I think the math ends up, I was a math major in college, right? So the math ends up working only if you partner with governments.
Yeah.
Because if you end up rescuing an individual out of slavery and rescuing them from that position of being enslaved, that changes the life of that individual. But what happens on the back end of that?
Yeah.
The back end of that is the slave owner now just has one empty bed, one empty slot, one empty place. And so what they're going to do is they're actually going to go and find another person to enslave. I'll tell you a story. In 2011, we received a phone call in Chennai, India, and it was a person on the other end who had escaped from a brick factory, and they said, "Please come rescue us. We're enslaved." And so we partnered with police in Chennai, India. We went to this brick factory, and we asked how many of you would like to go free, and 513 hands went up.
Wow.
And so it was the largest rescue operation that we had up to that point. And so we worked with police, we rescued, gave them release certificates and set them up to be able to return back to society and back to health. But what ended up happening is the slave owner ended up being a man of prominence, a man of authority, a man of power in that community. And so he didn't spend one day in jail. So you had 513 people that were set free and slept in freedom, but that slave owner also slept in freedom that night. Now, fast forward 5 years, we receive another phone call from a different person who was talking about a very similar situation because it was the same factory and the same owner.
Oh my.
5 years later.
Wow.
So we go partner with police, we go do a rescue operation. How many of you would like to go free? 586 hands go up. So think about this. 500 new people were enslaved in just 5 years because that one person did not go to jail, was not tried for their crime. And so the difference, so what ended up happening in 2016 is that person was arrested and did go to jail for the crime of having slaves. And so the difference in the stories is not what happened to 500 people, but actually what happened to one person. But we as an organization, we don't have the authority to arrest people.
Right.
We don't have the authority
Right.
to be. And so what ends up happening is we actually will work with the police and work with the government because they're the ones with the ultimate authority to be able to arrest the slave owner. And that is actually what changes communities. So you have rescue for 500 people in both of those stories. But when you arrest the slave owner, you're now protecting a community that will never be enslaved because that slave owner has gone to jail.
And you're really setting a tone for anyone that's involved with that, right? Uh,
Absolutely.
and there's got to be a real lot of challenges because you're dealing with different governments, with different philosophies, different values. How do you overcome those obstacles?
We just don't go away.
Okay.
Because we're talking about India, right?
Yes.
And when we started our work in India 25 years ago, we didn't have the government buy-in that we do now, and that has come through 25 years of advocacy, 25 years of partnership. And we're seeing this in Cambodia, we're seeing this in Africa, we're seeing this in Latin America, all over the world, where we come into a country and we have an understanding with the government. This is what we're setting out to do. And then it is over the decades of not going away and continuing to do this work that we end up seeing the governments believe us and partner with us and actually step up to be able to do the work themselves, as opposed to just watching us do it. They end up doing it themselves.
Yeah. Well, I know it's different in every region that you're focusing on, but I'm curious as to like as IJM steps into certain areas of being able to address human trafficking, are there other ways that or other needs that you see surface that like that's maybe outside of our scope? How do you address those type of things? Do you partner with other NGOs, other gospel-based ministries? How does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, we are working. Every one of our offices have community engagement, staff that work on the ground with families and with communities and governments and churches, and so we're partnering within every single context. We're looking to see how the community at large can be most benefited through our partnership. And so we're working with aftercare shelters, we're working with churches, we're working with government officials, we're working with, community organizers to be able to say, like, this is actually what we need to be able to do to be able to make a difference in the community. I remember I was in the DR in 2015, Dominican Republic, and being able to see how the prevalence of the crime, in that case, sex trafficking, was prevalent in the community, and it was something that needed to change the mindset of the community at large.
Yes.
And so we're, as a nonprofit with a handful of staff, it's a big, heavy load to be able to say, and on certain days it can be probably disheartening to say, we're never going to win. Like, we're fighting against the culture of this country, decades and centuries of culture. And so then we partner with churches who have platforms and microphones to be able to speak to the congregation, to educate them, to equip them to be able to say, this must not stand any longer. Another example of that would be churches in the country of Ghana. In Ghana, there's a large man-made lake called Lake Volta. And we work at ending trafficking on Lake Volta with young boys being trafficked in the fishing industry. And so we started a campaign called Freedom Sunday of working with the churches. And our community organizers, our church organizers, went around the lake and contacted hundreds of churches around Lake Volta, and that they were all preaching against slavery in the lake. And you have to understand that in these communities, in these churches around this lake, are people who are slave owners.
Yeah.
And they're also people whose children and nephews and nieces have been trafficked.
Right.
And so the power of changing not just an individual life, but real communities and real countries on how they approach the vulnerable is a transformative work that we'll never be able to fully appreciate and see the end of how God is using that. But we believe that this is the work that God has called us to do.
That's amazing. And as you're sharing, I'm thinking about what do you have any experience of someone, that you met that has experienced the incredible joy that freedom comes and brings after being enslaved?
Yeah, I was just in Korea for the Lausanne conference, Lausanne Congress,
Yes.
which is a once every 15-year event. It's a global gathering of evangelical leaders, and a survivor leader from the Philippines that has worked with IJM was able to share her story on the stage there. And she was able to tell this story of her triumph, about not just about her rescue, but about how she is empowered and now taking that message of justice on a global stage. And so you have this woman now, and she named Ruby, and this woman who was trafficked as a young girl is now speaking to a room full of 5,000 people in South Korea, the global leaders around the world, to be able to share this message of justice.
Yeah.
And I was privileged. I said I help train and equip, so I was able to work with her on her speech and things like that, and just the joy that was on her face. I don't know if you know any Filipinos, but they're very joyful people.
Yeah.
And just the joy that she brought to something that was actually very nerve-wracking for her to be in that room. But the joy that was shown through her preparation and through her presentation is something that just really struck me, that this is not just a story about her pain and about her trauma, but this is a story about God and his rescue and the joy that it's brought through her. And one of the things that has resulted as a result of that is, through her story is there was a podcast, a 6 limited series podcast called Finding Ruby, which tells her story in sort of 6 long form episodes. And
Wow.
when you get a marketing email or a letter, which I'm sure all of you open, you get a paragraph, you get maybe 3 paragraphs,
Yeah.
but this is actually 6 long form episodes of being able to tell her story. You get into the grit of her story, and you can feel the sort of coldness of the bathroom tile in her story. You can feel the anguish and anticipation when she's hearing the police outside of the door. And so, just her being able to tell her story in that way is just something that I've seen her flourish and really blossom through the telling of her story.
That's awesome. And one reason why, and I really appreciate you sharing that, Richard, because one of the reasons why I love sitting down and having these conversations is that we really want to kind of bring to you, Menlo Church, these stories of hope, the importance of why we want to bring hope to everyone by living out our identity in Christ every day. And I think sometimes we forget what it meant, what it meant for me to be enslaved to my sin, to my idols. And they weren't, oftentimes they weren't bad. They were good things. Whether it was education, whether it was health, whether it was my family, those are all great things. But anytime I elevate those things to be ultimate things, they actually I tend to give them the power of enslavement.
Right.
And then, I also have my vices. I have those things that I'm trying to quit, my addictions, my self-medication, how I deal with pressure.
Yeah.
And I don't know who might be listening to this right now, but maybe you're struggling with one of those things, something that you're ashamed to even let your best friend know about.
Yeah.
And just coming back to the freedom that Christ gives all of us. And I think this is what was amazing to me was when we went to Cambodia recently, I met some believers, people that did not know the gospel but knew that there was a God. And talking to some of those survivors who just truly knew by God's grace they survived.
Yeah.
And then they came to know this personal God that died for them.
Yeah.
And just the like you said, the joy and courage that comes out of having survived something as traumatic as something like that, and only God can heal. So,
Yeah, one of the things that I take from the stories that I hear of survivors is in their darkest moments, feeling completely powerless, there is yet a still powerful and sovereign God in control of the situation. It may not feel like that day to day, but the truth remains that there is a God that is powerful enough in any situation, whether you're enslaved in Cambodia or whether you are here in the United States. But another part of that is actually how God mobilizes the church to be able to help be his hands and feet. Oftentimes, if you think about stories of God intervening it is through the work of the body of Christ. It is through the community of the body of Christ and brothers and sisters that God ends up reaching people through the community, through the love, and through the activity of the brothers and sisters. And so it's just a hopeful reminder for us that no matter where we're at, and no matter what situation we may find ourselves in, God is activating the body of Christ around us.
That's right. Yeah. I know some of you are listening to this may be kind of like going, gosh, human trafficking is such a hard topic to talk about. Sometimes I would say I can be overwhelmed by the emotions of it. Like, I think, what was it? There's a recent movie on trafficking.
That's right. Yeah.
Was it Freedom?
Sound of Freedom.
Sound of Freedom.
Yeah.
And I was, for many months, I was like going, I don't know if I'm ready to watch this movie yet. And at the same time, I know that it'd be good for me to watch it, especially getting ready to go to Cambodia. And I just want to encourage each person, to pray about that. But there's something special about taking a step towards another person's life and what they've gone through. It may be different from yours, but there's so many similarities, right? And I think sometimes the other, I guess, temptation I have is just to numb myself. Right. And not, I don't want to feel this,
Yeah.
and but the reality is that we're human beings.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think it's a posture.
it is a posture.
I think we as people, I think we can, there's a couple ways that we can do this, right? We can make the mistake of only allowing the real deep and dark and far away stories in, and then ignoring the people in our community, ignoring the people in our church, ignoring the people in our neighborhood, and not giving them access. And there's a lot of ways that we limit the amount of stories, or even the aperture of how much light we let in.
That's right.
Right? And I think if we develop the discipline, I think as Christians, God calls us to pay attention to the people around us. You think about the woman who was bleeding, and Jesus is surrounded by the crowds, and all she does is touch his robe. And, when he stops and says, "Who touched me?" it's an absurd question on the face of it.
Everybody's touching you.
Everybody is touching
Everyone's
you.
pushing up against you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yet Jesus had the aperture open enough to be able to see a woman who, in desperation, just touched his cloak. And, that is a reminder to me that there are people hurting all around me every single day. People on the highway that, I'm driving next to, I don't know if we want to get into that, but, people in the church community, people in my neighborhood, people
That's
in our
right.
schools, people in our workplaces that are all bringing their own hurts and traumas into their everyday lives. And so we as Christians, I think, are called to just open the aperture a little bit, to be able to see them and be with them and allow God to reach them through us.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen. I think that's our prayer is like, whoever, people that are in our lives is to really see them through God's eyes, and to be prayerful about, God, what are you calling me to?
Right.
Some of you may know that I had the blessing of serving in the Tenderloin district in San Francisco for about a year. And I think, everywhere you look, there's needs. But I learned just to be prayerful and just to be really asking God and having that conversation of like, what are you calling me today?
Yeah.
And who are you calling me to talk to? Who you might not be. I mean, you just need to pray for that person.
Yeah.
So I think just having, like you said, that posture.
Yeah.
Having a heart more like Christ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a reminder for me of, I get to wake up every day and be able to hear these stories of God intervening in people's lives, and providing hope and a future. And so it's just a real privilege to be able to hear that. And I'm glad that I'm able to share a little bit of that for, your audience, to be able to say that there is a God, and he is a God of hope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amen. I'm curious, what are some of the things that you're looking forward to with IJM?
Yeah.
What are some things that we can be praying for IJM in the coming
Yeah,
months and years?
in the course of IJM's history, we're sort of entering into what we're calling internally as like a 3.0, IJM 3.0. In the beginning, it was sort of, back when Gary Haugen started IJM, there really wasn't anybody doing this sort of work.
Yeah.
And so it was sort of just proving the model. It was just making sure that people could be rescued and that governments could be, moved and work alongside. And then IJM 2.0 was sort of like scaling that through these different opportunities and making sure that it works in region after region. We're now at a point where we have done some pretty rigorous baseline and endline testing. I know we're nerding out here, but although I think this might be the audience for
Yeah,
it.
it might be. Yes, yes.
We did some pretty rigorous, sort of first class baseline endline studies to measure the drop in prevalence.
Yes.
And we're seeing it in jurisdictions, nine jurisdictions where we have tested it, and 9 jurisdictions where we've seen a 50 to 86% drop in the prevalence of the crime as a result of the work of strengthening justice systems that IJM's been doing.
That's great.
And so you're seeing it where we're saying, okay, it's working. It's proven, and we have the numbers to prove it. And so now we're in this sort of, I would say like almost a launch mode where we're saying, we want to take this and scale it as far as we can go. And so it's a really exciting time. It's easy for me to say that because I work there, but it is actually a really exciting time for us because we've seen it time and time and time again. And so now we're saying we want to just be able to offer this to as many places as we can. So we're really launching into this new phase where we're trying to take this to all these different jurisdictions, 57 jurisdictions over the next, many years, to be able to say, we want to not just rescue 1 million people, but we want to provide protection for 300 million people. That's 300 million people that will never need rescue.
That's right.
In the first place. And so this is like, again, going back to that story in Chennai, India, those are the people that won't be trafficked because they're being protected. And so there are people, there are women and there are children and there are men in communities that over the next decade will go about living their life in peace and in freedom, and not knowing that around them and above them is this umbrella of protection that is being provided through the governments that IJM works with, through our partners, through our aftercare partners, through our donors, and through our church partners, to be able to say, we are providing this protection. And they're living in freedom. And they may never be able to look up at the sky and see the umbrella of protection and say, thank you, Tim, thank you,
Right.
Menlo. But they will flourish in their lives as a result of it.
Yeah. That's a great reminder for us because I think as Americans, most of us who are watching this and listening to this, we are very privileged to be in a country that has a high level of stability, a high level of protection. It looks very, very different from most of this world.
Yeah.
How can someone, being really moved by what you shared, really sensing God spurring something in their heart, how can they learn more about IJM and maybe get involved with IJM?
Yeah, I would say there's 2 ways to get involved for personally, right? There would be a sort of deeper engagement with IJM or other organizations that are similar, but partnership with IJM, going on our website, learning more about the information, contacting someone, to be able to have conversations, to have a sit-down conversation, to learn more about what we're doing, and to join in the fight against what injustice is prevailing around the world. But I would say, on another hand, as Christians, as followers of Christ, the work of justice is not, IJM does not corner the market on justice. And so there are people and organizations and lives that are working on the edge of justice all around the world. And I think God's call for us is to take a step. And it may be a step into a partnership with IJM. It may be a step into joining a committee in Menlo Church. It may be a step into reaching out to people in your community. But I think that we are all called to take a step.
Yes.
To find people in our families, in our church communities, in our neighborhoods, in our schools, in our workplace, that are vulnerable, that are in a situation where they need the hand of God to provide some hope and in their future. And we can be that. And if we think about the global church of God, if we were able to reach the people in our immediate circles and in the stories that we hear and the organizations that we hear about, what a different world it would be if we as Christians were reaching out to people in our communities.
Yeah, and kind of echoing back to something that Pastor Phil talked about this past weekend, depending on when you listen to this, he was talking about how our culture is constantly shaping us. And unless we swim really upstream, go against the current, we're going to be drifting. And so this is an upstream type of swim.
Yeah.
Like it is uncomfortable to kind of reach out to your neighbor. It is uncomfortable. At the same time, if you have the love of Christ, if you really sense His prompting, I really want to encourage each one of you to take that next step, whatever that may be. And as you mentioned, Richard, like whether it's through IJM or any one of our other ministry partners that we have on our website, you just go to menlo.church/for-the-bay, and you can kind of see that on there we have a number of ministry partners you can get involved with or learn more about locally or globally.
Yeah.
But the whole idea is take that next step.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, is there any questions that you would like that I didn't ask that you would like to answer, or anything you want to share about IJM or yourself?
I mean, honestly, one of the things that I just wanted to be able to say on the podcast is just thank you to Menlo Church. I think Menlo Church has been such a long and deep and great partner in the work, and it is just a comfort to us as an organization to know that there are communities of faith partnering with us all around the nation and all around the world, and basically saying, we believe in what you're doing, and the work that you're doing is so important, and that we're going to walk together in that. So I just really did want to be able to say thank you to everybody that knows about IJM, supports IJM, and gives to Menlo Church, who gives to IJM, just as a partnership in the work that we're doing together. Because again, there are people around the world that are free and that are protected. And that are safe as a result of that. They'll never know my name. They'll never know your name. They'll never watch this podcast. But their lives have changed.
Yeah. Well, thank you for you, Richard. Thank you so much for coming by and visiting us. And thank you for IJM and all the work that you're doing. It's great to have this partnership with you. And we're looking forward to seeing what God will continue to do through IJM and what 3.0 looks like. All right. Well, hey, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Menlo Church, thanks so much for listening to this podcast, and we'll see you next time.